Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Best Practices in Supervision, Supervisors as Change Management Experts, with our presenter today, Dr. Tony Salerno. Just a little bit of housekeeping, just in case. Sometimes we've had a little technical difficulties with WebEx. Please just ensure that your own phones and computer speakers are muted. You all will continue to be muted throughout this webinar. However, you can communicate via chat. If you hover towards the bottom, you will see circles, and there's a chat bubble that you can click that will open your chat box. It should pop up on the right-hand side. You can submit your questions, your comments, your feedback through that chat box. Just make sure to send to all panelists before you submit. At the end of the webinar, there will be a feedback survey that pops up. Please make sure to complete that. As we do read all the feedback surveys and ensure that we incorporate your comments and your suggestions in our future offerings. Also, our slides and the recording for this webinar will be posted on the ctacny.org website within 1 to 2 days. So you can continue to check back on the website if you like the slides or the recording. So we can go to the next slide. And I'll introduce our presenter, Dr. Tony Salerno. Dr. Salerno is a New York State licensed psychologist with over 30 years of public mental health experience in adult inpatient and outpatient settings. He is McSilver Institute's Innovation and Implementation Officer, where he assists organizations serving impoverished communities to systematically adopt and sustain practice innovations with an emphasis on implementing trauma-informed and resilient supporting practices. At the end of this webinar, you will also have a Q&A period in which you can also submit your questions to our speaker. So, Tony, welcome to our presentation today.
Thanks so much, Lydia. I really appreciate that. And welcome to all of you. You know, this has been really quite a time of disruption, you know, for everyone. And this topic, I guess, around, you know, change, perhaps it's going to be as meaningful as it's ever been, in terms of what we're likely to experience and have been experiencing now, and will continue to experience really in the future. And I'm so pleased there were so many folks who registered for this particular workshop. And again, you know, we've also heard from folks, because I'm sure you have been more than inundated with topics related to COVID-19, and understandably so. But, you know, we had to ask ourselves the question, did we want to just make everything about COVID-19, or can we just, you know, have topics that really are generic topics? These are just topics that we had planned before COVID-19 around the role of supervisors in terms of being able to facilitate and manage, you know, change. And so we decided that we won't make everything focused on COVID-19, but that we'll have some topics that are really generic. But I'll illustrate some of the points and concepts through some of the things that you're experiencing and likely to experience in the future, you know, related to this disruption. And I hope that you guys find that, you know, a helpful, you know, way to go. So the topic really today is on the degree to which supervisors are in this management role versus a leadership role. And I'll say a little bit about what that is and what the differences are. And then what does leadership have to do with the area of quality improvement? Then some of the basic information around change management, and then just an illustration of some of these principles if you were to take a look at a change that's likely to be associated with COVID-19. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited about sharing this with you is, as a supervisor, I've been around a long time, so I've directed programs, I've been a supervisor in many different programs, and I knew none of this. I knew absolutely none of this. And so I had to pretty much fly by the seat of my pants when it came to helping my team as part of the organization really adopt new practices, something that was a significant change. And so I'm excited to share this with you, because I hope that some of the things you learn here will help you to kind of avoid a lot of the mistakes that I made in the numerous kind of roles that I had. So the leader management kind of challenge, and today supervisors are likely to really need to do both. That wasn't always the case in a lot of industries. That isn't always the case. So the first thing is leadership is not the same, and it's not better than management, but they're distinct. They work together, and they're really necessary, especially today. So, you know, the thing about being a manager and all the programs that I was a supervisor, part of it, if it wasn't in the beginning of creating something new, it's pretty much kind of like I want it to work like this, right? Is that we're all in sort of sync together, all moving. We kind of know where we're going. We know the pace at which we're going. In other words, just make sure, you know, that the trains are running on time, right? That all the basics of that, you know, we have clients coming in, the staff are coming in. We know what some of the policies are. We're implementing it. Clients are showing up, you know, all those sorts of very basic things. And the goal in many ways is to make sure that we don't, you know, tumble over right into the water, right? That we can keep kind of moving along. And it takes a lot of skill, be able to just do that. And so that's what you typically would find in a more management and supervisory role. But, you know, today it's a little bit different. Supervisors are also in this position of leaders, and it's not like crew anymore. Now you have these changing situations that you have to kind of adjust to, and you can be getting new directives and new approaches and new destinations, you know, on a weekly basis kind of thing, especially in the last, you know, 10 years or so where there's been a lot of change. So this is like, so, okay, so I really would like to have the crew, but this is maybe a little more exciting, but it's also a little more dangerous, right? So in management functions, and think about it in your own roles, right? You're really wanting to cope with complexity. You want to reduce complexity, right? You want more order and consistency. Procedures and policies become very important. We know staff know what the heck they're supposed to be doing, what their responsibilities are. Documentation is in line. Fiscal viability, in other words, we're billing, we're productive, we're doing all of that, and we manage risk in some way. So that's what we've already kind of figured it out, and this formula. And my job as a manager is to kind of keep that formula working. Leadership is a little different. Now you're in the business of, now hold it. We have change happening here. We're adapting to shifting conditions, expectations. We have to anticipate changes. We don't want to be caught off guard, right? Because then we have to like try to respond in ways when we're less prepared to do so. And at times needing to initiate changes, right? It's not like, look, what do you want from me, right? Takes all my energy to just kind of keep things going day by day. That was certainly my experience. And coping with change is in adapting to all these things. Where the issue of complexity, I think I already mentioned that, so let me just go on. In leadership, you're really dealing with setting a new direction, right? New challenges. It isn't like what we're doing now, not that it's not working, is that if we just stick with doing what we do day after day after day, well, that would be great if nothing was changing in the environment. But that's not the way life is. Things do change. And organizations that recognize that are more likely to adapt and be successful over time than those who kind of just hold on to what we know is familiar. And if change happens, we'll just wait and see rather than trying to anticipate it, which includes a vision for the future. And then engaging others in meeting that, right? In developing strategies. That's the thing about leaders is you need followers, right? You're not a leader unless you have followers. So that's a role. And you think about in your role, to what degree your team members really that they view you as someone that they need to follow, right? When it comes to implementing some new changes. So management again is just to establish those daily, monthly goals, organize meetings to assure necessary steps. You get it. Every supervisor has this function of management, but not every supervisor has the function of leadership. And so this is really the conversation for today that I think is going to be very difficult in our changing times and in a very complex healthcare system for there just to be an exclusive management type of role. I think increasingly you as supervisors are going to find yourself needing to really establish and assume a leadership role. Okay, so the idea is like how leaders communicate versus the way managers. And leaders, you're really, a lot is on motivating and inspiring, right? You got to get people to follow. You got to get people to take the energy to change and to deal with the negative feelings associated with change, right? Communicating how change is both inevitable and necessary. So your ability to communicate and my ability to communicate when I was a supervisor is not a nice thing. It's like really critical. You don't do that well, and you're going to have a very tough time in getting folks to kind of follow through and implement some of these changes effectively. You have to communicate for buy-in like all the time, mobilize the commitment, build consensus, right? Managers, a lot of times, and this is what I did, I'd say for when I was running a day hospital and clinic, when I think about it, I was kind of skewed a lot towards this management role, reinforcing rules, monitoring and identifying whenever there was a problem, right? People weren't doing what we expected them to do, and sometimes confronting folks who are not meeting expectations. It wasn't all that exciting, actually. But again, it was a little bit more unpredictable. And then, so you have to ask yourself the question, and are you a change agent? Are you viewed in your organization as someone who needs to lead and facilitate a change process? And that means contributing to a change as you are part of the leadership level, right? So it could be you as a leader with your team, but also you connected to sort of the upper level executive leadership, senior leadership, where you're part of that group when it comes to making a change, where you have to implement a new policy or practice or procedure, when you have to solve a recurring problem, when you're part of strategic planning. I don't know how often you guys are actually at the table when it comes to strategic planning. I've been in both roles, where I was more in a senior level, where I was involved. I didn't see one one supervisor at the table. So different organizations can operationalize this differently. Intentionally and systematically improving one or more quality indicators, or adapting to a shock change. I think right now we're kind of in a shock change, right? It isn't like we planned this out. Oh, it wasn't like, oh yeah, a year ago we planned about provision of virtual treatment services. I didn't hear much about that. So all of a sudden something happens, and it's kind of shocking because it was unplanned for, right? And it catches people off guard, and you have to very quickly adjust to that kind of situation. I think in many ways we're in that phase. So I have just a couple of poll questions to get a sense of where you guys are with this. So I would like to ask you, and think about, to what degree your organization really expects you to be involved in planning, implementing, and evaluating a planned change. So you in that leadership type of role. Is it a strong expectation? You say, yeah, this is what my organization expects of me. Is it kind of, well, moderate, just a little bit? And really, they don't really expect me to facilitate. They expect me to implement it, right? It's just they'll tell me what the thing is. You kind of do it, which is you manage it now, right? Rather than you have a very active role in facilitating the change process. So if you can just kind of respond to that, give you just a moment, and then we'll come up with the results. So give us a sense of where this expectation around the balance of leadership and management, how you perceive it in your organization. So Connor, this should just be a minute or so. We have a lot of folks on, so this may take a little bit long if we just be a little patient. Okay, so wow, about 137 folks said, look, they expect me to do this. Others more moderate, others just a little, but no one is saying that, which is really interesting. Very, very few, right? Very few. So the vast majority of folks who are on, essentially, there is some level of expectation. And for the majority, it's pretty strong. So that's great, because I think some of the things I want to share with you, you might find really useful. Here's another poll question. Now, all right, so if that's an expectation, how prepared are you with having the knowledge and the skill to facilitate a change process? If I had answered this question years ago, I would say pretty much flying by the seat of my pants. D. But hopefully things have changed a little bit. I definitely have the knowledge and skill. Or you say, look, I have some knowledge and skill. Look, honestly, I just have a little. And tell you the truth, I'm pretty much flying by the seat of my pants. I just kind of do whatever kind of comes to mind that seems to be common sense, basically, rather than having a knowledge and skill base. So we just give you a moment to respond to that. Okay, so a very large number, the majority, have some knowledge. Great. So I'm hoping to be able to maybe add to that or reinforce some of the knowledge you have. A good number of folks really have the knowledge and skill. Terrific. And I hope in many ways this might just be kind of reminding or adding some other dimension to your already strong set of knowledge and skills, which is terrific. And there's a good number also have just a little, just a few that are basically, we're like I was years ago, flying by the seat of their pants. But thank you so much. Okay, so let's get into like the change management piece, right? So why the heck, change? And there really is tensions, right? To kind of find an equilibrium. We know how to get through a day, right? With nothing bad happening. I think about sometimes that was my goal. To be very honest with you, people said to me, Tony, what is your goal in running this day hospital, which had like 100 clients? What was your goal? And to be honest, my goal was that nothing bad happens, right? If nothing bad happened, I felt very successful. It's a very low bar, right? But understandable because we're often very concerned about risk. So sometimes it changes. You got leadership that wants to see a change. They just have a vision, they have values, they want to move forward. There's new information or knowledge that is gained, right? Some research study that comes out, some finding that becomes important. In the late 1990s, the area of trauma-informed care and the ACEs, which I'm sure many of you have learned about, that study by the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, that set in motion a tremendous interest in looking at services across a whole spectrum of healthcare settings that is continuing to this day, right? So sometimes there's a particular seminal study that gets the attention of folks. Sometimes it's just in adverse events. I worked in the hospital for 10 years. Senior administrative incidents were like big. So it was like terrible things that really happened. That set in motion a whole effort around change. You have a lot of complaints from clients, right? Family members and others. That can set in motion. Changing regulatory, statutory requirements, having managed care, all these sorts of things can do it. Accrediting requirements, right? Market forces, system reputation. We just want to be seen as a fantastic organization. Sometimes a new patient oversight system. And now, today, it's maybe around a widespread societal systemic disruption related to COVID-19. So what accelerates change, right? It doesn't happen in a vacuum. And what accelerates change is it really has to do with the utilization of people's insights, creativity, imagination. It's all about people. It's not about technology. It's not about techniques. It's all about the engagement of individuals to support a change process. When a group of people come to learn together, new thoughts, new ideas, and they have a common goal that resonates for the majority. So it really is something that humans come together, either smaller groups or larger groups, that begin to chat, whatever the catalyst might be. What really accelerates it is the degree to which people really are committed to the change process. Research studies seem to have very little, except for things like the ACEs study, other studies that were out there that really were accelerants to change. Some ways, the fact that research is out there, evidence-based practices, all of that, that in and of itself doesn't really accelerate very much unless there are people who stop that particular change. Your challenge as a supervisor in a leadership role is that how do I mobilize and how do I engage others to follow? It's not easy.
Tony?
Yes?
I think we're coming off a little garbled, and your video cut out. There may be a bandwidth issue on your end.
Okay.
We can still hear you, but it's a slightly garbled. But your video's out.
Okay. How is it now? You hear me better, Lydia?
I can hear you. I think if you want to shift to somewhere else, or we can hear you. It's just slightly garbled.
Okay. I think it's important that simply hearing. Just let me go another minute or so and let me know. I'm going to shift this around. I'm getting a very...
if you can shift around a little bit, that would be.
I'm getting a very strong signal, at least being set up here. Let's take a look. Lydia, how do I sound now?
maybe turn off the video and let's see if that helps with the connection.
That helps. Okay. We got to all be a little patient with this. Does that help at all?
A little. It's still slightly garbled. Maybe keep going, and we'll let you know if we can really hear you.
I'll know in a minute if it doesn't improve. Okay, so the point I'm making here is change is not easy. When I was preparing this, I went back to some of the literature that I read years ago, and some of the things that a guy named Alvin Toffler, talked about in a book he wrote called Future Shock. And the future shock was that somehow change is going to be the norm, right? This idea of finding predictable, stable, equilibrium over time. He said, forget it. That's just simply not where the future is going. And he was talking about, payers, regulators, customers, competition, external pressures, right? All of that, and their own desire to make changes, that it can be overwhelming. And he said that's the thing to be very, very thoughtful about, is you can't overwhelm humans. When you overwhelm them, what you get is a number of these things, like resistance. And it isn't so much that people are against the change. It's whether or not you feel you have the ability to adequately assimilate the change. We sometimes use the term resistance as like people are just being a pain in the neck, right? They don't want to change. They're kind of lazy. They want to hold on to what's familiar. They don't want to, challenge themselves. But what Toffler really is that we might be misusing the term resistance. What it really is the person assesses in their mind, can I really accommodate and assimilate to this change, or is it going to be overwhelming? That's a really important thing. Sometimes people kind of go along with a change, but in a really superficial way, and that's because they can't absorb it. Or encroachment, overload in one area is going to affect other areas that are important. That's one of the things I learned around change management, is to think about unexpected or unintended consequences. Unintended consequences. I never thought about that. But it's kind of saying whenever we do a change, it sounds great. It looks really good. I think this is going to happen. Is to always ask the question, well, hold on a second. Let's be a little creative in our thinking right now. What could go wrong here that we're not even looking at, right? It seems like we'll do fine here, but is it going to perhaps touch another section? It's almost like doing wallpaper, when you got that little bubble, and then you fix that bubble, then the bubble shows up somewhere else. It's that kind of like mindset I think is important. And the issue of credibility, if it really doesn't work out well, and let me tell you, I've been around such a long time that there are things that people put a lot of time, investment, energy, money, and it was a bomb. It just didn't work out well. One of the consequences of that is not only did it not work out well, people were frustrated, but also credibility of those who were leading the change process. So those are, I think, important ideas. I think it's important to keep them in mind as you go forward. So main point, change is inevitable, but there are forces existing in all organizations to maintain the status quo. And I think in many ways, this shock change that we're dealing with now is that, you can't. There's this notion of kind of going back to what was our status quo, which means like face-to-face sorts of meetings and things like that. Well, that's something that people may consider in the future, but things may change in ways that are not going to be able to just go back to, quote, what was the normal, right? Understanding the human response to change, I think that's the piece that I didn't really appreciate so much, is it felt in some ways that this was a strategic change process, but the workforce experienced it not as strategic, but as more like a shock change, right? And understanding the normal, usual human response, and actually be a lot of research in this area. I'll share that with you as well. And engaging the workforce to support an innovation or a change in organization expectations, not a nice thing. It's really like sort of a critical thing. Sending out a memo, announcing a new policy, getting supervisors to say this is what we're going to do differently now. Those instructional or those expectations. Well, that's of course an important part of communicating, but that in and of itself is not what's going to sustain a change process. And that's one of those things that Harry Woodward found in his book, Navigating Through Change, which is like really important. It's all about people. It's of course about the idea of change. But great ideas fall flat. And lousy ideas don't, because sometimes lousy ideas have a more likelihood of uptake than really good ideas. So the goodness of an idea, the smartness of an idea, the validity of an idea in and of itself, without the full embracing from others. And that's really the big challenge for you as supervisors. That was true in evidence-based practice. I was director of evidence-based practice initiatives in New York State for 10 years. And let me tell you, I've spoken to so many groups, so many organizations, leaders and supervisors and direct line staff and peers and all, so often over those 10 years. This is going back in 2000 to 2010. And just the fact that there was a lot of empirical support for something had absolutely no relationship to whether people would pick it up and adopt it. So it's the human factor that I think is really the key point that I'm making. So what does the workforce care about? And this affects how you communicate. Staff are concerned that any change, that it will change the meaning they derive in their work. Right? Will the change in my role or function be satisfying, professionally rewarding? And so when a person hears a change is happening, we're going to go all virtual now, or changes, we're going to do a whole different thing when it relates to our intake process, or we're going to have a whole different way of assigning caseload, whatever it might be, right? The immediate human reaction is, hold on a second here. Is this going to have me do things or lose doing things that I really liked? The other is control. Am I going to be losing some control over my work life? I spent a lot of time figuring it all out, how to get through a day. And now I got these unwanted demands on my time, my energy, my autonomy. And the other is this change going to affect my status? Right? Is it affect my sense of authority and my position in the organization? And so this is what's been found over and over and over again. I didn't know any of this when I was trying to guide my organization to change, or the work I did in inpatient hospital. We had to create these treatment malls. You know, when I think back at it, I said, gee, it looked like nice on paper, but then when you actually had to do it, you know, from the leadership point of view and executive leader, it was part of our strategic planning over the next 5 years. But what I didn't appreciate, the workforce is experiencing it as like a shock change. And it's like there's like a sort of disconnect. We think it's a nice kind of, yeah, this is great, people will like it, we got to get on board, a lot of consent. Yeah, well, but that's really not what we find. And I think it's important for supervisors to just be aware of it, right? That whenever you're announcing any change, that this is what's going on in the minds of those who are going to be affected. And it could be going in your mind when you're expected to make a change. You might be concerned as a supervisor saying, oh, gee, they're doing this thing differently. Is this going to affect things I really enjoy doing? You know, I really liked having those weekly coaching sessions with my staff, but it looks like we're going in a different direction, and I really valued that. And you'd have the same concerns. I'd have the same concerns, right? Am I going to lose a sense of control? You know, autonomy is really important for folks. Professionals really value autonomy. That doesn't mean total autonomy, but that there is space where I can really pursue things that are important to me. And then my status, does it kind of stay the same? Does it go up? Does it go down? You know, is my role as a supervisor going to be enhanced, or does it get diminished in some way, at least psychologically, in the way I experience? Those are really important things to keep in mind, which I did not have in my mind, at all. So maybe that idea alone might be helpful to you. Now, so the common reaction, as I just mentioned, is agita. Now, for those of you who don't know what agita means, you know, as a Sicilian psychologist, agita basically, it means heartburn, but I think it really means heartburn of the soul. I mean, this really is a disruption and a sense of the stress that is more than just a little indigestion. It really comes down to, you know, it takes over your entire identity in a way, right? Your soul. So I say that in jest, but I think that's how I think of it anyway. So what's my goal then, Tony? So what's my goal, right, around this stuff, you know? Well, it in many ways, it's not to prevent, solve, or cure a problem associated with the shock strategic change, right? But to help people move more freely through that process. Skills and knowledge to manage change, reduce the agita, the upset, the disruptions, to deal with the concerns that folks have, just to anticipate those concerns. And oftentimes it means just reassuring people that the change is not going to reduce their sense of meaning or status, and that their voice will be heard, right? That's the issue of control. There's like people, I want to get my way. Control is not, I'm getting my way. Well, control is that you heard, that I had an opportunity and space to share my voice, to do it honestly, to do it without any anxiety or fear, and that people seriously, examined what I had to say, that they were respectful, that they heard it, and they may choose not to go in that direction, but that's fine. But at least I had space to share. Some organizations can be more on kind of getting people to shut up and to just go along because of fear and anxiety. That is not helpful. That is not helpful in the long run. And then maximize the opportunities the change may offer. That's the other thing of the message is just, look, let's look at what the opportunities are here. And the way you respond to that change, if you're in a meeting and you really don't like this change process that's going on, and you communicate like the higher-ups are really kind of idiots about this, don't really know what they're doing, then you're dead. Then it's like dead, right? Then it's all gone. That change process is going to go nowhere. And so those are things to, so one of the challenges, supervisors, is that we have to kind of like manage our own reactions and then be able to communicate in a way that's positive, because the negative kind of like issue, that doesn't mean cheerleading in a kind of inauthentic way, but it's the recognition that that's part of our work, is to really get folks to follow along, and we can decrease that likelihood very, very easily. Okay, so I talked a little bit about that, and these are some of the quality improvement dimensions. So usually any change that you're engaging in, it's designed to improve one or more of these dimensions of quality, right? Why change if it's not going to improve quality, right? Safety, efficiency, coordination, integration, equity, efficacy, effectiveness, timeliness, continuity, appropriateness, access, staff wellness, retention, turnover, all of those things, right? These are issues around quality. So any change, it might be helpful to think about, well, what is this change designed to do? Which dimensions of quality? And, you know, one of the issues around COVID-19 is what's been really, really big is safety, right? And continuity has been very, very big in terms of those quality indicators that folks are addressing during this crisis. Now, what's important, this is what some of the research finds, that when there's a significant change, especially a shock change of some sort, what do people want? They just want empathy. This is what the research tells us over and over again. They want to acknowledge that we're having an emotional response to things, is to not pretend like this isn't really big and that this isn't emotionally impactful. They want information, clear and reliable information, and a lot of it. Not overwhelmed by it, but it's succinct, it's clear, and areas where we don't know, we say we don't know. And there's a commitment to continually keeping people apprised of what's going on. Then there's ideas. They want ideas. They want, like, okay, so how are we going to address this? They want an opportunity for generating ideas, right? To be involved, especially when you have a sense of loss of control, which is really one of the most negative things that an organization can do. And I've been around for such a long time. I've been in those where there was a great deal of openness, and I've also been in situations where there was a lot of control, which really meant pretty much keep it to yourself. If it isn't just, pretty much like yes kind of stuff, where you just kind of like go along. But then when it comes to actually implementing things, people don't implement when they really have never been heard, or they just very, very superficially commit to a change process. And then what they really want is practical supports, resources, tools, time, information. What do I need? All right, I'm with you. I'm engaging in this change process, but I need some supports. I need some resources. I need some tools. I need some time. And it's that piece of it. That's what they want. But sometimes what they get is non-involvement, right? Failure to include those affected by change or responsible for change. They get autocratic behavior, cheerleading without support, or minimizing. Hey, this change is not a big deal. And I've seen that in some work I was doing in multiple family groups. Those organizations that said, oh, multiple family groups for adults with serious mental illness, piece of cake. That we asked them like how tough they thought it would be. The ones who thought it was a piece of cake never got it done. And those who said, this is going to be tough. This is a serious undertaking for us. those are the ones who are most likely to actually make it happen. So let me just stop at this point and see if there are any comments or questions folks want to kind of ask or just chime in or weigh in with comments. And Lydia, let me know if anything comes in.
Yeah, so we've had a couple come in. For example, somebody highlighted what they read called Change or Die, outlining difficulty in change that they were recommending.
I didn't catch all of that, Lydia. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So it seems like, for example, somebody recommended a book called Change or Die about outlining difficulty in making change.
Great. I mean, if that I'm not familiar with that, but certainly if folks who've been reading some of this literature want to recommend that, that's fantastic. That's great. There's a lot of good stuff out there. Someone's recommending also the work of Patrick Lencioni, who really talks a lot about high performance teams. And someone's asking, first-time manager with suggestion. I didn't see it long enough. Lydia, I don't know if you have it there. Some of the questions.
So we have some questions, for example, what is around low performers and what's the best way to address low performers in a time of change?
Yeah, low. You know, this is where we could do a whole. I think we are going to do a whole series on the idea of uncomfortable conversations. I think that this uncomfortable conversations has to do with folks who are just not pulling their weight, and that's one of the thorniest things because we like to. We want to be liked. We want to have good relationships. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. But there are very respectful, very thoughtful, right, ways that you hold people accountable. The danger of, and this is, Lencioni talks a lot about this, so if the folks want to look at, there's a whole series of books by Patrick Lencioni that addresses some of these issues. And he himself admits that it was the toughest thing for him to do as a supervisor and leader, is to really confront folks who are not doing a good job. And so one of the things I think to keep in mind is you need data. You need data. It cannot be like impressionistic. So if someone's having some difficulties, let's say in their relationship with their clients and all, say, look, we've gotten 2 or 3 complaints. Here are some of the complaints we've got. And I just wanted to share that with you. And also I think it's positive to start out with saying what's most positive that you see in that particular employee, and then have them reflect on, give them an opportunity to take the information you share with them, say, well, you know, we're noticing that, you know, you've had, you know, like 60% missed appointments this week, and we're a little concerned about how do you understand this? How do you see it? So I don't want to give you a flip answer now because these are, depending on the issue, can be really complex, but the one thing, and I think, Lydia, I think this is an area that we're going to do more in McSilver and CTAC, is the topic of dealing with individuals where they're not performing well, and how do you do it in as respectful and effective way as possible. So let me just leave it at that as we go on, just in the interest of time. Great.
And then the other comment was, as a first-time manager, what is your suggestion as the most important thing to espouse to be successful?
Well, I think I think the idea is that to really check your own experience. That could be in many ways being self-aware, you know. And I know someone just about the work of Brene Brown, and that's again another you know, person who is really thought very, very carefully and with really keen insight into the role of like leadership. I think that one of the first important qualities is to be sort of like, in a way, really self-aware, to kind of recognize and acknowledge some of your own worries, your own kind of anxieties, you know, about the role that you have. 2, I think educate yourself around some of the things you're hearing now, educating yourself with some of the work of Brene Brown, Pat Lencioni, and others. There is a knowledge base. See, part of the problem of being a new supervisor is, like, if you were like I was, as soon as I was a good clinician, right? I came to work on time, and I was very conscientious. I did the good documentation. Okay, we'll promote you to a supervisor, right? But those are two different kinds of like tasks. So I do think that the first thing is being able to have someone that you can talk to about some of the challenges that you're having. In other words, supervisors need supervisors too. So that's one issue. And then secondly is really do build up your knowledge base through many books that are out there and the webinars that we've been doing. I think that will be a good start for anyone who's new. If I had a fantasy, I would love to start a leadership institute in New York State where all new supervisors really had an opportunity to get support that they need. Okay, let's go on. Just in the interest of time, I want to get through this piece of it. So the very first thing is to kind of recognize, I think this is important. Sometimes the system is just not designed well. If you have a design flaw in the organizational system, then you may think that what's going to fix it is if we get people to work harder, or get rid of the rotten apples, or find scapegoats, or throw more money at it, or change the name of the program, right? Or codifying the policy, just making a policy about it. It's not going to work. I think that was probably the most important learning. And one of the things that the person who said, what do I need to know as a supervisor? I think this is an important thing, is that to take a look at the workflow, take a look at procedures, take a look at the processes, take a look at how you do, how the system, how this organization does work day to day. And because right now, whatever outcomes you're getting, your system is perfectly designed to it. You're not going to get better outcomes if you don't take a hard look at the system. These other things, for the most part, are not going to do it. And yet, I thought some of these things would do it. Like, you just get rid of those two therapists over there that really hardly show up to time. That would make everything better, you know. Or, gee, we need more resources here, right? But in many ways, that's true if the system is designed well, if there's no flaw in the system. But if the system is flawed, you're over. It's gone. Okay, let me just go. So I want to share with you an approach that I found very helpful called FOCUSPDCA. I learned this when I was director of rehab services at a large psych hospital. And part of my job, I was also, for a couple of years also, in addition to that, I was director of quality improvement. And we needed to get 70 to 80 of our departments across the whole hospital, inpatient, outpatient, involved in quality improvement. So that's tough, right? How do you do that? Everybody from housekeeping to dietary to security to psychiatry, right? And so we needed a framework. And this framework really served us pretty well. I want to share it with you. So one idea around this is that the practice of quality improvement includes finding a process to improve. Now, sometimes the problems will find you, right? So, for example, one thing might be safely opening up face-to-face contacts in clinics, just as an example, right? That might be something. And then what the research tells us is that then you really need to organize a team of people who have the knowledge, the role, the function, the resources, and have a big stake in the process. Clarify the degree to which your current practices align with the improvement goal. What do we currently do, right, that is a strength that we have that's going to help us to make this change? That's a really important process. I never did that. Then the other is to understand what will facilitate and impede the change process, meaning the practices, the policies, the people that's going to affect the accomplishment of the improvement goal. I never thought about that, right? Like, so what's going to get in our way? So we want to move towards this system. We want to introduce this new evidence-based practice. Okay, so what's going to facilitate moving along? Well, how do we do things around here? What about the staff? What about the attitudes, the culture? And that's going to help us move, and other things that we're going to bump up against. And then select a strategy with all that information in mind that meets the criteria associated with practical, sustainable success, and that it's in your control, right? And that's what a good strategy is. It's in your control. It affects many people. It's inexpensive, likely to be implemented correctly, not too complicated, and you can see whether or not it's working. Right? So I know it's a particular approach. So if you're in the process of facilitating change, then thinking about this focus piece. This is the focus part. Everywhere from, so what's the problem itself, and who's going to be working on it, and what are we currently doing that's going to help? What is going to potentially facilitate or get in the way? And then let's select a strategy But there's good strategies, and there are strategies that are likely to fail. And I've done both. I've done strategies that worked like a charm, and I've selected strategies that were terrible, right? And someone just mentioned about pilot chain. Yes, do things in a small way, test it out. I can't tell you how many programs I've seen both at the state and national level, millions upon millions of dollars. In fact, you have a number of those in New York City. People want to ever look it up around education and around, these projects around mental health. Enormous amount of money, right? But done big and done quickly. The problem, of course, is if you're going to fail at anything, fail quick. Fail really fast. Make sure you build in an opportunity that if it's not going to work, we won't find out after we spend $100 million. If it's not going to work, we don't want to spend a year doing something. Figure out small ways that tell us whether or not this is going to move forward or this is going to be a big problem. And so I'm a big believer in that. And the FOCUSPDCA approach tends to reinforce that strategy. So let me give you, and then Plan, Do. You guys have heard Plan, Do, Study, Act. I use Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's just a way to kind of say, all right, now let's try something in this small way, plan it, let's do it, right? Let's see how it went, and then we'll act on our findings. I mean, it's a pretty self-evident type of approach to taking this, right? So you do the action steps and doing your plan, then checking. Checking is really important. Like, will we even know whether or not we're on the right track? Right? How are we going to know? Sometimes things are so big that you don't know. I've been involved in that. And it's like, I don't know, did it work? I don't know. It seemed, 2 years ago, I think a little bit. I'm not sure. Did we collect the right data? Was it reliable? All of these issues, right? And FOCUSPDCA keeps us on track in many ways. It holds us kind of accountable. And it gives us, for me anyway, it gave us a guide when I was doing this in the hospital from again, dietary, housekeeping to psychiatry, for each department to take on a project of improvement, that this was really very, very helpful to folks. So that's why I'm kind of like sharing it with you, because it's been tested in a way that I think really makes some sense. Okay, so let me give you an illustration, right? First, I want you guys to just type in the chat box something you believe will need to be addressed as programs begin to open. Consider lessons learned during this time, new discoveries, findings, problems, future initiatives. But we've just gone through something, right? And this is not going to last forever. But if you can just chat, get a sense of what do you think are going to be some of the changes that you will be involved in, as programs begin to open, when we are not in this lockdown situation. Just want you to think about that a little bit. And some folk, emergency preparedness, comfort level, safety monitoring we're going to have to do more on safety monitoring. Anything else? Physical use of space, right? Okay, there's a lot of stuff coming in. Fantastic. Rehiring staff. Safety for the staff. Efficacy of televisits. How to do sessions with masks. Hiring new staff, right? Staggering days. The personnel changes that may take place. Sustaining virtual access. All of these things. Different ways for staff productivity. Fantastic. You guys get this. You guys get it. So let me kind of go on, and I'm going to just illustrate one piece. So let's take this one. Offering choices to clients regarding their preferred means of receiving services. For example, safely opening up face-to-face contacts in clinics and offering virtual appointments. I'm just giving that as an example. I've heard a lot about this. We've heard from many practitioner organizations. Some of our clients are more likely to actually go into virtual than they will come to the office. We're getting less no-shows, all of this type of stuff. Some are writing in, might be involved training of staff. Be a lot of elements to this, right? But let's see how we might apply it to FOCUSPDCA. Okay, so you have to organize a team. That's the very first thing. Is that, I guess some might say, well, the CEO and the minister, they'll sit around the office, or Zoom, and they'll figure it out. But what FOCUSPDCA is saying, and you might actually recommend this, right? Say, look, who should be the deciders here? Whose voice should be heard, right? And you need a high level of trust and productive conflict Those who've done Lencioni recognize some of these things. But the right team. Who's going to be affected by this change? Who's going to be expected to carry out the change? Who has some experience and knowledge about this change? Right? Who has some resources that would be important for us to have access to? And who's really into this? Whose values, interests, beliefs? Who'll be champions for taking this on? That's the team. It is not the executive group. What FOCUSPDCA says is you have the executives, you have leadership, but what you also have is people who have a stake in whatever the change process is. That alone was so helpful to me in my work over the last 15 years. So that's the O. Clarify, to ensure, like, what are we currently doing that is aligns with helping these choices? Okay, we have the Zoom type of thing set up. We have a system in place for safety if people are going to have physical contact. You know, just thinking about what's in your favor is important, part of the process. So you can clarify that. Then understand what's going to get in our way. In what way will our policies, our workforce, the attitudes of our workforce, the culture of our organization, the capacity, the financing, the priorities, the leader, all of that. What's going to move us towards being successful in offering clients a hybrid model, those who come in face-to-face and those who are virtual. You know, what is it that we have to take a look at what's going to be supporting it and what's not? Again, that's the understanding the facilitating conditions. Let me go on. Selecting a strategy, building on your strengths. This is a good strategy, right? It's just not expensive. Can tell if the idea is working. It affects many, can be done reasonably, is in your control. It aligns with regulations, right? Unlikely to cause other problems. Practical, reasonable, tools and resources available, and it aligns with other efforts. In other words, we have other things going on that's going to support it. The more of these you could check off, you're not going to check off all of them. I will guarantee you'll not check off all of them. But the more of these that you check off, the more likely it is that you'll be able to be successful. Okay, and the plan, again, the who, what, where, when, how. This one I think folks are more familiar with. The actual doing of it, the checking. Just keep a close eye. So we say, okay, how is this going to work? So let's take a look. We're going to start very slowly. We're going to have folks who are coming in face-to-face. So let's see how it goes. You don't wait of 2 months to say, how was it? It's like day one, right? The first morning we try it. We meet in the afternoon. What did people find? What was it working? What were the client's experience like? What were the worries, right? What were your worries? So that is a really important message around change. I can't tell you the waste of so much money when folks sometimes don't build that in as a way of checking and then acting on what you found. So let me just ask you guys a final question here. So I've thrown a lot at you. You're going to have access to these slides because I didn't think I was going to make you experts in change management in an hour. But I think there's enough information on the slide deck. And then also the recommendations from all this literature that's out there. I would really encourage you guys to do it. It changed my work dramatically when I became much more aware of these principles of change management and implementation science. It's been one of the more gratifying things. Never got it in psychology school, right? We tend not to be exposed to this literature because we're so exposed to clinical literature. But this literature comes out of industry, and we've been able to, healthcare has been able to increasingly adopt it. So let me just ask you in this question. So you were either, let's see here. I can't even read it because, okay, did you learn? So now you've listened to me for about 55 minutes or so. Did you learn about or remind of at least one idea that will support you as you move forward in a role that's more leadership around facilitating change? So from what you've heard so far, would you say, you know, Tony, absolutely yes, there was at least one idea here that I think I can come away with and actually will be helpful to me? Or you say, well, mostly yes, it was somewhat, but Tony, don't take it personally, but not really. If you could just kind of share where you are with this, that would be really very helpful. I love what Seth just said about involving stakeholders this is what it's about. That organizing a team means organizing voices. organizing perspectives. Okay, so a huge number said absolutely yes, mostly yes, and somewhat. I'm okay. A couple people saying, Tony, not really. I don't think that this has really done it for me. There's a couple of people, but I think overall, folks have, and you'll have access to these slides so that you can kind of review them and take a look at some of the other literature. But I think there's a few ideas, at least from my perspective, that you can keep in mind as you see yourself increasingly being involved in making decisions that are a significant change. You can be a resource to your organization. Doesn't mean your executive team knows this stuff. I was on a leadership executive team at a large hospital for 10 years, and I got to tell you, it was only in the last few years I was exposed to this, and it made a world of difference for me. And so don't assume that. You can be a resource to your organization in having some of these basic concepts of change management and implementation science. And we have a couple of minutes. Yeah, I mean, someone just said if folks don't really feel like they can, it may be an indication that folks are overwhelmed. I'm glad you said that. I want to appreciate that how difficult this is. I try to imagine that if I was still running a day hospital with 100 clients with very serious mental health problems coming out of state hospitals, and it was now, I have to tell you, I would feel, I already thinking about it, I can feel being emotionally overwhelmed. I'd be panicked, to be honest with you. My first reaction, I think, would be like panic. How do I keep people safe? And how do I keep treating people who are so vulnerable from like a distance? So I appreciate that very much. Thank you for that comment.
Great. Tony, we do have some questions if you want to take a couple
Sure.
in the couple minutes that we have left. And there are folks that did reply saying that accessing the materials later so that they can let it sink in would probably be very helpful. Others said that it'll align well with their current process.
Good.
So that has been helpful. I think that a couple kind of themes are on how do you support change when you may not agree with it, or you may not have support yourself in doing it.
Yeah, that's going to be this is one of the challenges of like leadership. And so if you have whatever the executive leadership team, the first thing is whether or not you have a chance, you have an organization that gives you the opportunity to share your perspective, and that your perspective is taken seriously. That is like number one. Secondly, if you choose to work for an organization, and this was true for me, there were times I had to implement a policy or a procedure or something related to that was decided at the Office of Mental Health or decided within my administration in the hospital. Once I get a chance to share my perspective and leadership says, look, thanks, Tony, but we're going to go in this direction, then it's upon me. If I'm going to stay, then what I can't do is to sabotage it. Then I have to say, listen, I don't think this is a good idea. I understand why you guys want to do it. And then we're not going to get consensus, but leadership does have prerogative because they have responsibility. And then the job of the supervisor, and this is the way I accepted it, is that I'm going to move this along. And even if I didn't agree with it, because I'm not in charge. Now, if I thought it violated an ethical, moral issue, that's a whole other story. That's a whole other story, which probably need like a half an hour just to discuss that. But generally, you're not going to always agree with the decisions. I didn't agree with all the decisions made, but it's in a really, it's more of a sabotaging condition you're in when you say, well, I'm not going to support it, even though I'm going to stay with the organization. And then it just becomes a big mess.
Right. And then I have sort of, there are some folks who are supervising a variety of staff, everything from, college graduates all the way and licensed clinicians to some that may be high school. So it kind of varies depending on their staff. And their question was, would you do anything different because of that? Or would you use the same approach for everybody?
I have to say, I pretty much would use the same approach. I think the principles of supportive supervision, being able to hold people accountable, whether they're students, volunteers, or a seasoned clinician. I think some of these principles, to me, they feel like just sound principles in human communication and in people problem solving and in people working together as a team to accomplish a particular goal. And it's like the who is involved in it at whatever level, to me, is less important. Each one of those levels can contribute a different amount. I don't have the same expectations as I do for like a student as I have for a seasoned practitioner or people in various positions. But the notion of accountability applies to all, but respectful to what their knowledge is, their skill, their expertise, and their role.
Great, thank you. So we're at time. I think we were able to answer a number of questions. I want to highlight some upcoming webinars. We have a couple related to the crisis, for example, understanding the process of bereavement. We also are going to talk about integrated care. And then the third webinar will be on crisis and safety planning via telehealth. So I encourage you to please register for those. You can go to our website. You can look for our emails. We also will have a feedback survey that comes up at the end. If you can also click in the chat box. There's a direct link to it, or it'll also pop up. If you can complete that, let us know what additional information you need on this topic or other topics. We greatly appreciate it. Here's our contact information. Obviously, you can go to our website. The slides and the recording will be posted within about 2 days at ctacny.org. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us, and we really appreciate your feedback, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Stay well, and best to all of you, and stay safe and stay well. Bye-bye now.